Subscribe to The Prepper Historian now, because what we're about to cover is the kind of hard-earned knowledge that once kept entire families, farms and frontier communities alive when resupply simply wasn't an option. If you care about real history, not romanticized myths, and you want practical lessons that still matter today, you're in the right place. When people talk about frontier survival, they often focus on hunting or cabins, but blacksmithing was the quiet backbone of self-reliance. On the American frontier, a broken tool wasn't an inconvenience. It was a crisis. When the nearest store was several days away, by horse. Blacksmithing turned scrap iron into food security, shelter, and safety. Understanding how frontier smiths worked teaches us something modern survival culture often misses. Durability, repairability, and adaptability mattered more than perfection. Why blacksmithing became essential on the frontier rather than a specialized trade. Most frontier blacksmiths were not artists or specialists. They were problem solvers. Their job was to keep tools working with whatever materials were available. Wagon tires cracked, ploughshares wore thin, axes chipped, and hinges failed under constant use. The blacksmith didn't order replacements. He reforged, reshaped, and repurposed. Iron was expensive and scarce, so nothing was wasted. Old horseshoes became knives, broken files became chisels, and wagon parts became farming tools. For modern viewers, the lesson is simple and uncomfortable. Reliance on replacement parts is a luxury. True resilience comes from repair skills. Building a frontier forge, well, it was all about making do with what you had and a bit of clever thinking. A frontier forge was often nothing more than clay, stone, and honestly, a good dose of common sense. Many times these forges were dug right into a hillside or built snug against a cabin wall, just to help keep the heat in. The firepot, it was usually shallow and wide, designed for burning charcoal, not coal, since coal was, pretty rare in a lot of places. Bellows were handmade too, crafted from wood and leather, and patched up over and over, sometimes for decades. When it came to forging, heat control mattered more than just raw power. A smith, well, he learned to read the colour of the metal, knowing when iron reached forging temperature by its glow, not by any sort of fancy gauge. This skill, you see, still matters today. Anyone trying their hand at off-grid metalwork should really focus on fuel efficiency and being aware of temperature, instead of just chasing after the latest modern equipment. Now, let's talk about the core tools every frontier blacksmith relied on to survive. Despite what you might think, those smiths on the frontier worked with very few tools. The anvil, often small and portable, actually did most of the work. Hammers were chosen by weight, not shape, and, more often than not, were handmade. Tongs were forged for specific jobs, not bought in big sets, and with a hardy tool and just a few chisels, most of the cutting and shaping could get done, no problem. This minimalism really matters. Instead of collecting a bunch of tools, frontier smiths, well, they mastered techniques. A modern prepper can actually apply this by focusing on versatile tools and learning multiple uses for each, rather than depending on single-purpose gear. So, here's how essential tools were forged when, honestly, failure just wasn't an option. Axes, hoes and knives were forged with layered construction to conserve steel. High-carbon steel was welded only where an edge was needed, while softer iron formed the body. This made tools easier to repair and, frankly, less likely to shatter. Heat treatment was done by eye and experience. Quenching mediums varied depending on water quality, oil availability and climate. When an axe dulled, it was reforged, not just tossed aside. Applying this today really means choosing tools designed for maintenance. Learn to regrind, reheat and reharden edges instead of replacing them. On the frontier, blacksmithing was absolutely essential. It supported agriculture, defence and daily life all at once. A single blacksmith, you see, served everyone. Farmers, trappers, builders and families alike. When shipments stopped, he made nails. When parts broke, he repaired firearms. And he shaped hardware for doors, wagons and livestock. Blacksmithing wasn't some isolated craft tucked away. It was woven right into the fabric of survival. It was, quite simply, integrated. This is important for, well, modern self-reliance too. Your skills should overlap, just like they did back then. Metalworking, for instance, supports food production, shelter and security. Even basic forging lets someone create things like hinges, brackets, hooks and repair hardware that, nowadays, most folks just throw away and replace. Now, let's talk about what modern survivalists can actually practice, without any romantic nonsense. You don't need a 19th century shop to learn the principles of frontier blacksmithing. Just start with heat control, maybe using charcoal. Practice forging simple items like hooks, wedges and punches. Learn how to rehandle tools and reharden their edges. And, perhaps most importantly, study how materials fail when they're under stress. Frontier smiths? Well, they learned through repetition and necessity. Modern learners, you know, can recreate this by deliberately repairing broken tools instead of just buying new ones. The mindset, honestly, matters more than the setup. Why does frontier blacksmithing remain one of the most transferable survival skills? Blacksmithing taught patience, observation, and a real respect for materials. It forced people to understand limits. You couldn't rush iron. You couldn't fake skill. Those lessons, they translate directly into preparedness today. In prolonged disruptions, the ability to maintain and fabricate tools becomes, well, exponentially more valuable than stored supplies alone. If this deep dive gave you new insight into how real frontier self-reliance worked, subscribe to The Prepper Historian, share this with someone serious about history and survival, and keep these skills alive by studying them, practicing them, and, above all, respecting the people who depended on them to live.